class-based work on the issue.
You said they have a committee on human rights?
Yes, Committee for Human
Well,
Rights.
that in itself is
Super.
something.
We've got an ally right there.
Donald
It's-
Brown,
It's
you know, the
important to
anthropologist,
know
has
that
been writing about
they
human,
do, because, you know, in terms of practice actions, just getting a committee on human rights is
That is
important to
superb.
an organization. That's a good resource.
It's the
Okay,
American, like the
so,
US.
Donald Brown, the anthropologist, has a book called Human Universals, he published 20 years ago, which began this process of sort of rethinking cultural relativism, which 100 years ago was a progressive idea, in contrary to sort of the notion that there was one standard which was European, and we need to respect cultural differences. But, simple within group and between group,
Yep.
similarities and differences analysis, which you can say, now class, let's say it, within group and between group, similarities and differences, which I ask my class to do, then one recognizes that there are universal human needs, and there are culturally specific ways in which to learn that. And think of a discourse that's, not existence in the West, in the United States, it would be a human needs discourse. During the Cold War, it was the West that was talking about human rights. It was certainly not a non-existent discourse. It was one produced and promoted by U.S. imperialism to justify saving Vietnam, for human rights by bombing it into the Stone Age. Whereas the East was saying, we're for human needs. We have the right to education. We have the right to food. We have the right to housing. But by the way, you don't have the right to free speech. In Ethiopia, during the Mengistu regime, there were terrible human rights violations. So, the discourse was tragic. And yet, in the period since the Cold War, we have restored the discourse on human rights in social work. There's a dozen books downstairs on that. And in the American Sociological Association, which I remember, there's a section on human rights. There is zero discourse in sociology or social work on human needs. Zero. You're the one of you people I've heard speak about it. Joan pointed out the relationship between human rights and human needs. But I think until we clarify this,
We can do it.
We can do it. There's a discourse now. Michael Reich and his partner from Maryland have an article in the Families in Society, which is the first peer-reviewed journal article talking about human needs in a while. Although it denies there's such things as universal human needs, it picks up on Jim Ike. CSWE took human needs out of its EPAS and substituted human rights for it, thus sort of perpetuating this false countervailing of the two. And it was because of Jim Ike's keynote talk at CSWE, that sort of convinced people, wait, human needs is culturally relative. So it's an amazing thing. So thank you so much for your talks, all three of you.
I want to focus the discussion. You can talk about whatever you want here, and you can tell me what you really want to talk about, but I was hoping that we would talk about the actual nitty-gritty of working in the classroom with this. But if nobody has anything to say about that, then, just a minute.
I'm sorry.
Then we can move on to other topics. So I'd like to hear from some other people in the audience about what thoughts got sparked with this, or is anybody doing this in the classroom? Yeah. So we have people who are doing it in the classroom.
I'm intrigued, and I would like to have a further conversation with you at some point. We don't have the time. Because I like a human rights framework more than a human needs framework. Notwithstanding this notion of dismissing the point of human needs and saying that we don't have some universal human needs. My experience as a community organizer is the needs orientation and always doing needs assessments is a way of reinforcing superiority and inferiority. And there's a way of classifying people as needy and somehow incapable. And so when I hear the rights orientation, it's a much more powerful orientation to me, which is that people have fundamental rights, and that our ability to acknowledge that and move from that base is more powerful, in my experience, than moving from a needs base.
Other comments about that?
I could talk about one challenge that I'm facing right now and maybe get some help, especially for those who are working on kind of the intersection between different rights areas, like incarceration or, you know, placement, involuntary placement in a facility, and the different forms of rights violations that might happen there, and how you work with students who are actually doing that enforcement, right? So in Massachusetts, there's still an institution that practices electroshock treatment as a means of compliance. And in many other juvenile detention systems, there's chemical compliance. There are chemical compliance norms to try to, you know, foster docility or behavioral compliance, I guess. And so my students really grapple with, well, you know, we're following all the protocols, and they've all been established, you know, with the very best science, and it's our job. And you know, how far do we go in this thinking about the individual's autonomy, their right to physical and psychological security, the kind of slipperiness between notions of torture and appropriate force in a carceral setting or in a mental health setting. And,
I mean, it's framed in that setting as somewhat helpful, right? That this is actually something that helps these individuals control themselves
and
better.
very earnest and let's say fluid kind of explanation for why it's necessary and why an expansive notion of you know, applying norms of inhumane and degrading treatment and punishment doesn't apply to that setting. And so I'm just wondering how people grapple with those kinds of tough, thorny questions when the social workers are the practitioners themselves, and they're coming up against a wall where they're feeling like they have to justify what they do, even though it might be in opposition to international norms and even our own legal norms.
That just reminds me so much of teaching ethics and dealing with the ethical decision. How do you make an ethical decision? You've got a dilemma, not a problem, you know, and to lay it out. And I actually, that's one of the things I do with students, and lay out which of the many values that are in this situation you have to choose. Sometimes you have to choose which you feel is, once you have, this is an understanding that you've got the facts straight fundamentally.
Right.
Because I know there's some debate about some of the I was talking to the students about this last week, that there's doing some forms of shock therapy that are very different than the kind of shock therapy that was basically resulted in lobotomies almost. It's different, and there's some literature on it that's supportive. But, so how do you figure out, once you have the facts straight, what you do from there in terms of framing it for yourself? And then starting with the values first, in terms of how do you order them? You know, thinking about do you order preservation of life fundamentally above everything else? And, you know, going from there. So those two things for me go together very well. You know, using an ethical decision-making model, the two screens before that with to figure out some of the dilemmas in terms of the conflict of rights that you have. You say that's the challenge. We do have a conflict of rights at times.
What I heard you saying was that they were using this for behavior control. There's also a use of shock therapy to alleviate human suffering.
Right.
And the person requests it or wants it.
Yeah.
That
a
may have
different
ethical
thing,
dilemmas too, but it's a
Yeah.
different
Yeah, and I
thing.
should have been more explicit, actually. Amnesty International has an active campaign to try to end this one practice in
Yeah.
this Massachusetts
I think
institution.
that's a different,
Okay, yeah, that is
a different kind of situation.
It's an interesting, I mean, it puts the College of Social Work, all of us, in a really interesting position. Because, I mean, clearly, we were sort of discussing this yesterday, Kathy, but I mean, clearly, our college field office has your college field office has a relationship with this organization. So a student might very well be appropriately decide, I'm ethically opposed to this activity, and I can't do this. I won't do this. So then, is our field office willing to remove the student from that placement to say, without sanction on the student, and put the student in another situation where they might find themselves, I can't really imagine a social work setting without some ethical issues, but there would be less stark than, Amnesty is, knocking on the door and putting stickers on my car. But, it's not clear where our colleges line up, so it's not clear that student can feel, and clearly that's just a mirror of what happens with our graduates when they go out into the workforce, right? So that for a student, perhaps they can get out of jail free if they have people like you to stand behind them and say it's appropriate for the student to seek a different placement. But when our single parent graduates get the job, it's a much more complicated decision to leave and to seek a situation that may be more ethically appropriate, because we as a profession, we have to be aware that we are not always in a position where we're supporting our clients' human rights. And that's a very hard thing to talk about.
I'm not going to put the camera on myself.
Go back to Virgin Islands.
Sorry, I raised my hand. Is that all right? I was thinking what we do. Thank you. I don't really want to be in. All right. We have had some similar issues, not quite as dramatic as what you were just talking about, but we've been trying to enlist our alumni association to become people who are there after you graduate, so that we become the team that isn't while you're a student there, but who is there afterwards, and sort of creating sort of these circles. They're very small now, maybe 2 or 3 people each, but they are like, mentor isn't the right word exactly, but some kind of support. We don't have a good name for it, but a circle of something that is like they're going to be other people with you. Should you need to make that decision, you are not alone. Hopefully we can help train you so you're not alone at work, but if you feel alone at work, we're going to try to figure out how to help you brainstorm, strategize, but also we can collect letters, signatures, there's this wider way of trying to take that. So we're like experimenting with this sort of postgraduate, how do we hang in there with you? Now, theoretically, NASW, our organizations are that too. I mean, if we figure out how to make ourselves be that, but I don't know that we've necessarily all put that in our mission statements. We have these positions, but not necessarily a position about doing that. So I just wanted to speak to that a tiny bit because we're giving it a try. For sort of when you have an ethical problem, we're actually talking about trying to create a county-wide IRB for research issues, so when agencies don't have IRBs, they can have a place to go, and we're asking people to step up and volunteer for a experimental IRB. Now, that's a little different than what I'm talking about, but we're trying to figure out how to have some of these things, recreate them in the community, but then this alumni association kind of thing as just a way to be there for each other and still have this school support, if we've got school support, by the way. I realize that we may not know that. And I'm not sure we have it all clearly defined like you're suggesting, but we're dipping our toe in, and that's just one tiny suggestion.
This is an interesting conversation to me, because what we got off on, and it's really not getting off on something, is do we have organizations that we are in that exemplify the human rights kind of orientation that we're trying to teach students? I mean,
Great question.
And it's a very difficult situation because I think what is more difficult for people is to try to change the organizations in which they exist than to teach somebody to change something out there. But, there are probably many examples within the organization of, quotes, human rights violations right where we're working. Yeah, go ahead.
So you had your hand up first.
Oh, go ahead.
Are you on the same topic? Or?
I wanted to respond also with what she was saying.
Jane.
Jane was saying. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mark.
We have, I believe we have 4 choices in any kind of situation. One of them is to withdraw. And under some conditions, 3 of those choices is good. One of those choices is we could describe a situation as difficult and choose to accept it. Describe it as unacceptable and choose to accept it. And that's where rarely a good choice. But withdrawing, there are certain circumstances under which that's an appropriate choice. But it is one of the choices. We can also contend with that situation and maybe not only remove the student, but support the student in contending with that. And not only supporting that student's power in doing that, but adding to that student's
Right,
power,
right.
our
Standing
own and
behind.
others. So that just is a choice we have in looking at that. And I know my students, they always have this difficulty with ethical challenges, and I wanted them to take a look at an ethical conflict, which is different than an ethical challenge. And they had an assignment where they had to describe it, where one of their ethics, which is a valid ethic, was operating at the same time another one was, and they were in conflict with each other, which is different than, boy, this would be a tough one to adhere to. And this is where they are both at. Yeah, and I think that was real helpful for my students kind of getting back in the classroom, for them to think through, I might be in a situation where,
There's no clear.
yeah, and what might that look like for me, and how might I address that? So some of the notions of having some sort of like kind of almost like a framework for how I do these things then emerges from that.
Connected to, I misheard the first part. I thought you were telling me that the students didn't see it, but the faculty did, so I apologize, I misheard that, the way it was set. But I do think, though, if we don't operate with, when the students recognize something that's clear, and as you framed it, that's clear, and we say, well, you know, just do the best you can, we lose all of our moral authority as social work models. Because if we say accept this that you know is blatantly wrong, then we don't have any moral authority to say
Excellent.
anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my sense of it. And I know it's uncomfortable and political, and I've been in that situation myself in a different case with an agency. And so I think that that's an important thing to do. I think we actually have to have ways that we actually have to figure out ways to be in solidarity with students and move from that rather than from our very carefully crafted, safe places. And I know it's difficult because I experience it on a regular basis. But that for me is really important because I already hear students basically highlighting, you know, that, well, they're saying this and they're doing that. So that doesn't go together for me. And then it also gives them permission to do the same thing, you know, so it's really.
With clients.
Exactly, yeah, just a thought.
Well, you know, I think even though, you know, when we got to CSW, we have oppression and the standards, but that's been demoted to a practice behavior now, and then we had human needs, that was removed, now we have human rights. I think we have to figure out a way to somehow create a discourse which we can sustain, and rather than worry about the latest bells and whistles and what's in the standards.
That's a good point.
I was intrigued with what you said about Bertha Reynolds mentioning human rights because I tried, you know, to find out how she spoke about human needs. And I think it was in Client and Community. She talked about, she was worried about the latest buzzword in social work, which at the time was self-determination. And she was worried that this notion of self-determination, which, you know, John McKnight and others are worried that it could be misused to say, well, just do it by yourself. You know, you don't really need federal, let's empower communities.
Assume personal responsibility.
Yeah, assume personal responsibility. What she wrote about was that she worried that the growing focus on client self-determination would result in either social work or societal neglect of basic human needs. So she was thinking about this relationship between human needs and human rights back in the 30s when a lot of people really weren't thinking about it. But I would argue it's still an unresolved discourse. And I do look forward to having the conversation because I would have to admit that I had always thought that human needs would not be an idea which would grip and empower people, although I fundamentally disagree with John McKnight because the issue is our needs assessment has been focused on what needs services do we have that you need. That's disempowering. What do you feel your basic needs are and how they're not being met? That's fundamentally empowering.
It's a different
Look at this
conversation.
gentleman from Occupy Cleveland with his sign on the streets.
What is the sign say?
Human need, not corporate greed. That was the #2 most used slogan in the Occupy movement. It has become a mass slogan all over the country. So I think that we've got to link these two concepts in a more politically convincing way or sort of missing out on a basic conceptual and strategic opportunity for how to reconceptualize social reform.
You know, I had a lot of conversations with people in preparing this, and in talking to people about, and I always tried out the human rights, human needs thing on everybody. And basically I got this response, why does it have to be either or? They go hand in
Right.
hand.
Exactly.
And I think, and throw in social justice with that as well.
Absolutely.
Because they work together, and I think that the EPA itself is saying that we've got to do these in conjunction with one another. They don't talk about human needs, but I added that to it. And, you know, if we can, I think we have to, this is me, but I think we have to move from there to some of the thorny problems about how do you do this? How do you get, in the environment that we were talking about, in an environment that's sort of hostile to what, however we do it, whether we combine them or do them separately, how do we get students to think about it, students to whom this is alien, and then how do we get them, once they see what it is, to move and do something in practice?
Just have a real quick thing, and I didn't evolve it as much as I would have liked, but in my classes, we always had food in my classes. We just always, it was part of the deal, and everybody brought food and stuff. And so, in one class, I just passed out lottery, raffle tickets, and some of the people got to eat the food, and the rest of them didn't. And they got, and the people who didn't really got angry about that, you know. And then that went into place. So then my classes also worked together in teams. You were a group, you gave yourself a logo, you developed groundworks, all that kind of stuff. And that's how we did. So in another class, what I did is I just assigned one group as you're the group that gets to eat. The other groups accepted that.
When you did it that way.
Yeah. It was kind of an interesting thing.
Privilege stuff is cool, huh? When you have it.
But maybe next week we get to be that group. I don't know what but they put up with it.
They accept authority
They
maybe as
accept
opposed to
your
random.
right to make that call.
I don't know, it was just kind of and I didn't develop it as much as I would have liked, because I did that in my last semester when I was teaching, but it was kind of an interesting reaction, two different reactions there, and I don't know, I just throw that out as something.
Think reams about that.
You've been wanting to say something.
One observation and a question. The observation is this, at risk of sounding cynical, I think so many of us, if not all of us, really underneath it all, will feel for any new suggestion, what's in it for me? And that really is natural. And what I get like your reactions to is that if you have a society that honors these human rights, everybody's going to feel more secure. Everybody is going to feel a certain kind of freedom to innovate, to feel that they aren't going to end up in some basement starving to death somewhere. And believe me, we've got such an insecure middle class in the United States that has to appeal to us on some level, however subconscious.
That really strikes me, because I have this piece of video that I show my students, and it's a man in Sweden being interviewed, and he's been asked about, how does he feel about the fact that he can only rise so far in the system because there's rules about how many times you can be earning more than another person in essence. And so the assumption of the interview, you can almost see there's an energy, and of course he's going to talk about that as being limiting and so forth. The man responded, it has no effect on me. I live a very good life here. The fact that we don't have the level of disparity that you have means that I'm not watching behind my back all the time for someone who wants what I have. I'm not dealing with the kinds of crimes you're dealing with. I'm not dealing with, I have everything I need in our system. So, because I often will get the student who goes, you're a socialist. And I'm, right now, that used to not bother me when I was in Pennsylvania in Union Land. I'm in a right to work state now with no, so it's a whole different ballgame for me. I'm still figuring it out. But it's really interesting because they've been taught that's a very bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so to listen to this person talk about essentially, the things that they associate with socialism as making his life very rich and wonderful. It's just a beautiful thing in response to that.
How do you respond when a student accuses you
Say thank you.
The first thing I would respond, yeah, exactly. The first thing I respond is that you sound, well, how do you understand that word?
Yeah.
Because I actually gave them an assignment, a glossary assignment, because he clearly didn't understand the word. So then we all have a glossary, we refer to it and talk about it, essentially, and then I have, because I want them to be able to what that means and that it has
Discussion, but I have a question for the two folks I don't know if we've heard from Austin. What did you learn in the doctoral and master's programs at Austin about human rights and human needs and social justice?
Well, we have the basic course that is the social justice course that all of our first year students take. And I took it from a very dynamic African American instructor who did a great job at allowing us to go through the dynamics of privilege and oppression in a way that was also creative. So she was also creative based. We did a lot of projects where we were either writing or drawing or bringing in things that represented who we thought we are throughout the process. And so it really, coming into social work, not from the human services field. I was a business major, and then I worked in healthcare for 7 years. So I didn't have all of the human service training. So I really enjoyed the aspect of trying to understand where privilege comes into play and what oppression looks like, but also where empowerment happens through understanding who you are and what we should be getting as a human being. But also, my program helped me a lot too, because my whole focus was international. So I did a lot of human rights work and empowerment work throughout Africa. And so my focus there through the beginning was on where I was in things, but then immediately was shifted to the international focus of how we empower the communities in which we serve.
I did my doctoral coursework in Austin, and I'm working my PhD now, and so I did my undergrad as a social work, I did my master's there. So in terms of the doctoral coursework, I think a lot of the discussion was more around how to bring in that piece into the classroom and understanding, I think kind of as Tim said, this wanted you to delve into it first, since you actually took the courses there, but weaving it into the coursework in addition to having a social justice class, being able to weave in social justice or human rights issues into the courses. So I haven't taken an actual course in terms of practice at UT Austin. Right now I'm teaching my first class, which is a right practice class with individuals and families, and I'm teaching undergraduate students. So it's just an interesting experience to me, hearing some of the feedback from students and working to bring in the piece of human rights for students. So that's interesting. But my dissertation is also internationally focused in Central America. It's kind of international focus, but also looking at labor migration. So I just find this to be a huge issue in terms of my research, work both abroad and with labor migration.
Can you talk about any resources that you found that would help
have to go.
you,
We have to leave.
Pardon me, I just want to say I have to go, and I'm disappointed in that. It's been real helpful.
we're glad to do it.
And so thank you very much. I look forward to bigger conversations, so thank you.
Do you want to say anything in closing, a nice closing thing, because I have to leave.
We're not closing.
I have a 12-hour drive home, so I'm leaving, but 2:45 is when it ends.
Oh, okay.
Do you want to say something closing? Or, I mean, I just hate to start and cut it off, but.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
Well, I want to thank all of you for being here, and I appreciate your contributions to the discussion. I think we've just scratched the surface. And one of the things that I like to do, since I have everybody's email, somebody has the list somewhere.
Right here.
Is continue the discussion. The people who are here, if you want a copy of the longer paper, you can request it of me. My email is jdworkin@csus.edu. I will have a distribution list. I'll send out an email. If anybody has notes that they took and you want to forward them to me, I can send them to everybody. So we have a composite of things that people said. If you want to share resources that we've shared here, I can do that. So I will send out an email to everybody. Distribution list will be on the email, and then we can communicate some more so that we all.
And she'll send the information about SWA too? You'll send SWA information and the faculty network information, how to subscribe in that same email to these folks? Information?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
You said you would. I just want to make sure you're going to do that. Okay. I have to go now.